Welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I'm Michael R.A.I.N, a science fiction and fantasy author on a journey to go from nobody to bestseller, and I'm documenting every step of the way. Tune in every week as I pull back the curtain on my writing life and how I'm building a writing career while working a full-time job, raising a family, and attending law school classes in the evenings. You can find show notes for this week's episode, a free starter library of my fiction, and much more at michaelr.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 154. 154 is a good number, and we're changing gears this week because last week I threw a lot of data and numbers at you, so we're going to be a little bit smoother this week. And I titled the name of this episode, How to Master Yourself and the Universe. And we'll talk about why that is later, because I saw a great TED Talk that I wanted to share with you because I thought that it so wonderfully and succinctly captured so many of the problems that writers face. All right, so announcements, I got nothing for you this week, is what it is. Wins for the week. My newest novel cover is done. So this urban fantasy series that I'm writing, the cover is done finally, and the edits are back from editor number 1, and I've got those all baked and ready to go, and I ran the book through my editing engine that I talked about last week, got it all cleaned up, and now it is off to editor number 2, who should have it back to me by the end of the week, at which point the novel will be real. So I am in the process of working on 250 Self-Publishing Questions, Volume 2. I'm almost done with it, so I'd like to finish that before this comes back from the editor. And then I need to publish Indie Author Confidential Volume 4. That is ready to go. And at that point, I'll start writing Book 2, move on, and my goal is, if I can, try to get Book 2 done by March 22nd, which is the day that my final law class begins. So it would be nice in a perfect world to get that done and off to my editor by the time I go to class, just so I don't have to worry about it and I can focus on the class. But, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So yeah, that's kind of that's what I'm planning right now, and that's my win for the week. Now, lesson learned this week. This is a lesson for my friends who use Microsoft Word or who have Microsoft Word on your computer. I had the fortunate pleasure of finding out that there is what is called proofreading software. Now, no, I'm not talking about Grammarly or ProWriting Aid or White Smoke. Not talking about those. I'm talking about software that editors use. And I'm not talking about Microsoft Word macros either. I'm simply talking about proofreading software that is actually, it comes as a Word add-in that editors and proofreaders use to help them catch some kind of generic issues that Grammarly and ProWriting Aid don't care about. So like, did you leave any open quotes? Did you start a line of dialogue and did you leave it out? Are there times where you said the word drop off and you used it you used it as one word in one place and then you hyphenated it in other places, and so the usage of the word itself is inconsistent? Are there acronyms that you use without introducing? These are all sorts of things that proofreaders look for. All right, and there is a software. It's called PerfectIt, and it's a Word add-in. I have it for Windows. I don't know if it's for Mac users. I hope that it's for Mac users too. But it's an add-in that basically, it's kind of like a last line of defense. So I purchased it. I think it was like $70, but it helped me catch a lot of really interesting stuff that the macros either it's kind of complicated to catch or they just can't catch. And so I think I helped improve my error rate even more in the future, because now every usage of a hyphenated word is always going to be consistent because it'll catch it if you don't. So there's a number of other things it catches as well. I would highly recommend you check it out. I'm probably going to do a YouTube review on it. It's called PerfectIt. And again, this is something that proofreaders use. And I'm kind of the opinion that if it makes a lot of sense to understand how editors see the world, doesn't it? Because it makes it a lot easier to to think about how to write your book and how to edit it so that you can catch things that the editor's not going to catch. And so I did not know that there was proofreading software out there. So if you didn't know, then definitely check out PerfectIt. All right, so the idea of the week, this is just kind of a silly idea I had, but I wonder if there's something there. And it's the idea of genre-based music. So let me explain where I'm coming from here. So I think it would be interesting if there was a band that wrote music in the vein of a certain book genre. Like imagine like a rock band that wrote songs that were urban fantasy themed. Like, wouldn't that be interesting? Or so you would have what you could call urban fantasy rock. And I think it would be an interesting blend or interesting crossover. There could be some interesting opportunities for bands and authors to work together, urban fantasy romance or urban fantasy rock, yacht rock romance. I don't know. I'm just coming up with crazy stuff, but I think it could be interesting, right? So genre-based music could be a fun idea of the week for someone who wanted to take that and run with it. Now, topic of the week. So I wanted to talk about a TED Talk that I saw, and it popped up into my feed. I don't know how it popped into my feed. I just must have been watching a bunch of metaphysical stuff. But it was a TED Talk by a Shaolin Kung Fu monk from China who basically started off as a college graduate and went to business school, got, I think, an MBA, and was working in the business world, and just realized that life just wasn't enough. Like it just wasn't fulfilling him. And so he gave up all of his earthly desires, and he went to become a Shaolin monk, or Shaolin monk. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, and learning Kung Fu. And his talk perfectly encapsulates so many of the challenges that writers face daily in terms of how he learned how to master himself and what he learned in his teachings. And the gentleman's name is Master Shi Heng Yi, and I included in the show notes for anyone who's interested a link to the TED Talk so you can watch the TED Talk. It's about 18 minutes long. And then there was also a really good article that summarized his talk and kind of used plain language and just kind of teed everything up in a nice, pretty bow. Because I watched the talk about 2 times, and I went and searched and kind of Googled it and found out what people were talking about it. And he actually did this talk last year, so this was like right before the pandemic hit. So one of the last TED Talks where people were he was on a stage in front of an audience, and I think there's something to be said about that. So check out those links in the show notes if anything I say today is interesting to you. But what he was talking about was that self-mastery is the most important thing that you can think about in terms of your journey. And on your journey to self-mastery, there are 5 hindrances. And these hindrances, like I said, are, as he was talking about them, I was thinking to myself, this is exactly what writers deal with. This is exactly what people email me about every single week. All right. So there are 5 hindrances to self-mastery, and he has a strategy to help you break past those hindrances. All right. So the first hindrance to self-mastery is what he calls sensual desires. So he describes this as anything that you can observe with the 5 senses. So he kind of used a metaphor throughout of climbing a mountain. And you want to climb a mountain. So you're at the base of this mountain, and you want to get to the top because the top is where clarity is. And you're at the base of the mountain, and as you're climbing it, you smell this beautiful aroma. And you notice that there's a restaurant on the side of the mountain. And you go to the mountain, and you eat this wonderful food, and you enjoy the company of many strangers. And while you're in this restaurant and enjoying yourself, suddenly you don't want to leave the restaurant, because why would you leave the restaurant when you're eating all this delicious food and in the company of so many amazing people, right? And so this becomes a sensual desire and a distraction from you climbing the mountain. Now, you could take this in many other directions, right? So you could take this with, drugs or, addictions, harder addictions. Or you could just simply take it at face value that there are certain things sensually in our senses that distract us from wanting to master ourselves. Okay? That's the first one. The second hindrance is the hindrance of aversion. So let's say you leave the restaurant and you're climbing the mountain further and it starts to rain and you don't have an umbrella and you don't have a raincoat or a poncho, and it is the worst thunderstorm you can imagine, and the rain is just pouring down on you. It sucks. You can't even see where you're going. And what does the normal person do? Well, the normal person turns around and goes home because it's too hard. All right. So to put that in context for writers, when you declare to the world for the first time that you're going to be a writer, and you sit down and start writing your book and you stare at the blinking cursor, how many people quit? A lot of people quit. And then when those people that don't quit, who proceed to write their novel, and they get out of what I call the honeymoon phase, which is somewhere around 20%. Once you get out of the 20%, it's like, oh crap, what the heck am I doing? Because all the passion that you started the novel with is gone now, and all you've got is your fingers in your mind, and you're thinking to yourself, you can't do it. And how many people, I just wonder how many people quit around the 20-25% mark. And then those people that keep going, how many people quit during the murky middle because nothing seems like it's making sense? How many people finish their novel but then quit because the self-editing is too scary and too daunting? How many people finish the self-editing but then can never get over themselves to publish their first book? How many people publish their first book and then it sucks because there's no money coming in, they've spent however much money to produce it, and they get no results, which makes them feel ashamed or guilty that they spent all this money to publish a book when they could be spending it on their family or on their mortgage or on their retirement. And it becomes hard, doesn't it? And I wonder how many people quit just based on that. They quit because it's raining and they got caught without an umbrella and they didn't realize how hard it was. But the best thing to do, and this is what Master Sheng Yi says, or the Master says, is to keep going, because that is what tempers your spirit. So when it gets hard, that is a good sign, and that means that you should keep going. All right, that's the second hindrance to self-mastery. The third hindrance is what he calls heaviness, or being trapped inside your mind. This is what I call being trapped inside the theater of your own mind. I talk to a lot of writers every year, and it's either people that reach out to me or people that I just happen to encounter, in my journeys all over the internet. And there's one thing that a lot of people have in common, at least a lot of beginners, and they have it in common, and that is they get trapped in the theater of their own mind. It's like being stuck. The Master says it's like being locked in a cell. All right, those are the words that he used. The word I use, or the words I use, is it's like being trapped in the theater of your own mind. You're stuck in a movie theater, and you're watching a movie that constantly tells you that you can't do this, you're never going to make it, your writing sucks, and you watch that movie over and over and over again, and you start to believe it, and there's nothing anyone can say that will convince you otherwise, and it's almost like this Eeyore voice that's in the back of your head. All right, and I recognize it when I hear it, when I talk to beginning writers, because I've talked to enough people that's what that sounds like, and it's like being trapped in a cell. trapped in the theater of your own mind. But the thing is that your mind will fool you. And even though you may be locked in a cell or trapped in a cell, the cell's actually not locked. You can unlock it at any time. The lock is on the inside. It's just a matter of whether you have the courage to step outside of the cell and have the courage to be able to weather what you see. And I used an example on my YouTube channel that it's like if you're trapped in the theater of your own mind, just walk outside of the movie theater. No one's holding you inside the theater. Just walk outside into the sunshine. What would you see if you walked outside of it? But so many people get trapped. They just get stuck, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. They're trapped because of things that happened in their childhood, things that happened to them in the past, maybe a failure or just something that left some sort of an imprint in them that makes them feel that way. And one of my jobs, at least as a teacher, as someone who has been there myself, because I have a healthy dose of that myself, it's just that I've had enough life experiences to help me be able to step outside of that, and I try to help other people see that. But that's the third hindrance, is that being locked in a cell. Okay, that's the big one. You can solve that problem. You can solve a lot of stuff. And then the fourth hindrance to self-mastery is what he calls restlessness. So wanting everything quickly, not being present is kind of what he describes that as. So if you're so worried about the future that you can't be present, or if you're so worried about the past that you can't be present, this is a hindrance to your self-mastery. Because when you fail to be present, you fail to appreciate where you are in your journey. Every part of your journey up the mountain, so to speak, is special in its own way. There's something to be relished in when you're on the base of the mountain, when you're in the middle of the mountain, when you're in the summit, when you're in the middle of that rainstorm. There's something special about every part of that journey. And that is something I have learned over the years that you guys know me, I'm definitely a strategic thinker. Like, I think a lot about the future. I don't dwell too much on the past, but I do think a lot about the future, and I sometimes do play the future games, right? But at the end of the day, I enjoy where I'm at. I like where I'm at, even though, I wish that I could, be more successful faster. and that's where this hits a lot of writers, because writers want to be successful overnight. Without exception, everybody wants to write that best-selling book, be able to quit their crappy job and get there. And the reality is, for most people, that's just not how it progresses. And so when you start to feel that restlessness and you make those decisions and you make bad decisions based on that restlessness, that stops you from mastering yourself. It becomes a distraction. Okay. Now, the fifth hindrance to self-mastery, and this is the biggest one of them all, is what he calls skeptical doubt, which is, in other words, self-doubt. If you doubt yourself, you will never make it up the mountain, even if you have the skills to make it up the mountain. So many people I talk to deal with self-doubt. Self-doubt is endemic to the writing profession. I don't think you can be a writer without having a healthy dose of self-doubt. Now, there are some very arrogant folks out there. That just is what it is. But I think for most people, self-doubt accompanies you on your journey to become a writer in varying shades, myself included. It's for some weird reason, like I said, it's almost required to be a writer. It's like a required personality trait that you have to have self-doubt. Isn't that the weirdest thing ever? Like, okay, you want to be a writer? Okay, do you have self-doubt? Okay, you can come on in. I really believe that's true. I have not talked to a single writer that does not deal with it in some way. And that's because we're sensitive creatures. and you can't get the level of sensitivity that can create a writer without getting the dark side too. Because our sensitivity allows us to be amazingly perceptive. It allows us to exercise our imagination in ways that other people cannot. But like I said, that self-doubt is that dark side. All right. And the master uses an example. He says that there's a gentleman who tried to climb a mountain, and he wanted to see up the mountain, but he couldn't see. And so he kind of circled the base of the mountain, and there were people who were coming down the mountain. And he asked them, "Hey, what did it look like up there?" And so one person would tell him. And then he would ask the next person, "What did it look like up there?" And the next person would tell him. And he asked, 100 people. And then at some point he decided, I don't need to go up there because I've heard enough about it. And then he couldn't decide which way to go up the mountain. So he just decided, I don't need to do it. That's self-doubt. Self-doubt is poison. It is poison. And the worst part about it is that once you defeat it, it comes back in a different form. Completely different form. And the worst part too is that it learns how you defeated it, and it will never allow itself to be defeated that way again. So as you progress throughout your career, your self-doubt, as you conquer it, will evolve and change based on where you are in your career. Based on where you are in the mountain, your self-doubt will change, and it will continue to try to pester you. It's like a ghost that will never go away. You can vanquish it for a time, but it will always return. And if you understand that, and understand what it looks like when it appears, because even though it changes form, it still is the same essence. And if you can recognize that essence, then you can learn how to, like I said, identify it and vanquish it again. I really do believe that. The more, I used to think when I first started writing that there'll be a day where I feel like I know everything, and all this anxiety and fear I'm feeling about the book not doing well, or marketing or whatever it is, will go away. And it never went away. Well, it did. What I was feeling in the time went away, but it always came back. And when it came back, it was always stronger. It was like a hydra. You cut off the head, and then 2 or 3 heads come back. So that's self-doubt. So those are the 5 hindrances to self-mastery: sensual desires, aversion, heaviness, restlessness, and self-doubt. And what did the master say about breaking past those hindrances? Because I thought this was very, very insightful. And he talks about remembering the acronym, or the phrase, "Let it rain," and RAIN is the acronym. So R is for recognizing the hindrance. So when a hindrance shows up in your life, because it is bound to show up in your life at some point, the key is to recognize it, understand it when it walks in the door. A is for accepting the hindrance, not ignoring it, but accepting it, understanding that life is a river of emotions and a river of spontaneity and things that just happen without any real explanation, and just understanding that and accepting it. I is for investigating why this potentially happened and how you can prevent it and respond differently next time. Maybe there's something that triggers you every single time. I don't know, like maybe when you write after you come home from a bad day at work, you have writer's block or something like that. Why did this hindrance walk into your life? Why are you feeling restless right now? Why is it that you want to turn around and walk away when it's raining on the mountain? There's a reason. Sometimes you don't know what the reason is, but there's usually a reason. There's usually something that triggered this emotion inside of you to make you feel the way you're feeling. And if you can understand that, then you can understand how you got there. And then maybe you can respond differently next time. And N stands for non-identity, which means stepping outside of yourself and recognizing that you, I think he used the word something similar to you are not you. You are the self, or you are not even the self. Everything just is. And how can you control your response? There's a saying, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control your response. And in the context of being a writer, letting it rain, recognizing the hindrance, accepting the hindrance, investigating why it happened, and controlling your response is probably one of the most powerful things that I think anyone can teach you. Because there's something the longer I do this, the more I appreciate, and I don't use appreciate in a complimentary way, but the more I appreciate how emotions just screw everything up as a writer. Socrates said your senses will fool you. Well, your emotions will fool you as a writer. They absolutely will. And part of learning to be a writer is learning how to set your emotions aside. When you're writing your novel, especially your first novel, learning how to avoid that emotional roller coaster. Well, you can't really avoid it, but learning how to kind of lean into it. Because there's so many emotions that are going through your head when you write that first novel. There's so much fear. There's so much happiness. There's so much anxiety. There's so much euphoria when you write a scene that you really love. There's so much attachment. And those emotions can cloud your better judgment. And then when you start editing your novel, there's all sorts of different emotions that kind of come onto the scene, right? So like you feel, a scene that you really loved when you were writing, that you were in flow, all of a sudden you hate it in editing. So there's this feeling of hatred in editing that comes out. There's these feelings of self-doubt that are different than when you were writing your book. There's feelings of fear. Like, oh my God, this book sucks. No one's ever going to want to read this. I need to scrap it and rewrite it, or I need to pay a developmental editor several $1,000s in order to buy some confidence. I'm not recommending that anybody do that. I'm just saying that's what happens. At least that's my perception of what happens, right? And yeah, that's your emotions get in the way. When you are marketing your book, for example, you might believe in your story so much that you can't see that you have an ugly baby from a cover perspective, for example. Or you just might not accept, you might not be able to see that your story has some errors that readers are pointing out, but you can't see it because you're so invested in your story, and it's the emotions. It's the emotions. Your emotions cause so many problems the longer you stick at it. And if you can master those emotions, you can master just about everything in the writing life. Now, I'm not saying not to feel emotions. I'm not saying to be completely stoic. I'm just saying to recognize that your emotions can oftentimes be bad compasses for you. Another example I'll give you, somebody comes and approaches you and says, hey, I want to turn your book into a movie. Oh my God. Imagine the euphoria you probably would feel. Well, how many times have writers felt that and ended up getting scammed or ended up signing bad contracts? So emotions are something that can affect you throughout your writing life. And, the concept of emotional intelligence, it's kind of the same thing. The concept of recognizing emotions and controlling how you respond to them, I think is exactly what the master is getting at when he talks about letting it rain. All right. So I hope that this has been interesting. Hope it's been helpful to you. Maybe I said some things here that resonated with you. I certainly learned a lot from this talk, and highly recommend that everybody watch it if you're interested. The link is in the show notes. Have a wonderful week, and I'll plan on talking to you next week.
Thanks for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this episode, you'll enjoy my backlist episodes at michaelaran.com/podcast. For your free starter library of my favorite novels, join my fan club by visiting michaelaran.com/fanclub. If you're a writer and want to connect with me further, check out my YouTube channel, Author Level Up, for helpful writing advice at authorlevelup.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week.